The Mark Hopkins, as she was originally named when she was built in 1888 in Grand Haven, Michigan. The Hopkins received her name from the son of Captain Harris Baker. This would be in a long line of owners that would own the vessel. The Hopkins was a wooden steamer barge. She had a length of 186 feet, a beam of 32 feet, a depth of 13, and she also had 2 wooden masts as well aboard her. She could also carry a crew of up to 18 at a time. The Hopkins would spend her time primarily carrying lumber, along with hemlock and other wood products as well, like veneer. These would be loaded both in the hold and on top, piled high on her deck. Being that the Hopkins was a lumber hooker, this would mean that she could also tow smaller schooner barges behind her as well, which would also be loaded with additional lumber or other cargo as well. Her towing career was quite impressive, starting in 1889 and going on until her demise in 1919. In fact, the Hopkins also sank. In 1895, on September 27th, the Hopkins would be sunk in Hay Lake. This is near Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. In 1895, on October 19th, the Hopkins wreck would be bought again and then raised by Henry McCorrin. This little wooden steam barge would be quite the workhorse across the Great Lakes. Her career was very impressive. Lastly, here in 1902, on September 27th, the Hopkins would be renamed to her final name, the Myron. She would serve for a few more years until November 22nd of 1919 on Lake Superior. On November 22nd of 1919, the former Mark Hopkins, now the Myron, would depart from Munising, Michigan, out onto Lake Superior. She would be making her way for Buffalo, New York. The Myron would be loaded down with 700,000 board feet of hemlock lumber, which she would also be towing behind her the tow barge Miztec, which also was carrying additional board feet as well aboard her. Aboard the Myron was a crew of 18, and aboard the Miztec were 7. Just shy of around 2 hours after leaving Munising, a terrible and horrendous November gale would begin to brew on Lake Superior. And this storm was headed right for the Myron and the Miztec. The winds from this storm would begin to grow to over 60 miles an hour, and the temperatures as well would drastically drop. There was also blinding snow as well in this storm. The waves from this intense storm would begin to smash against the Myron and the Miztecs. Aboard the Myron, water would begin inrushing into her, and her pumps simply could not keep up with the vast amount of water rushing below deck. It also didn't help that ice began to build up as well on the Myron. This would affect her center of gravity and would make her unstable, along with all the lumber and cargo aboard her. Probably did not help at all. The Myron's engines simply could not keep up with the mass amount of water inrushing and the ice that was continuing to build up on her. She would be reduced down to about 3 to 4 knots, which is 5 miles an hour. Captain Walter Neal, who was aboard the Myron and in command of her, would make the decision to cut loose the Miztec barge near Vermilion Point. This was a hard decision to make, but he had to make it in order to fight his way to the shelter of Whitefish Bay, which was his plan. After the Miztec barge was cut loose from the Myron, she would actually drop her anchors, which would swing her bow to the seas, and actually cause them to survive the storm as they rode it out. The Myron now was at the mercy of the storm, and she would begin the fight of her life to survive and make it for shelter into Whitefish Bay. As the Myron was making her way forward in this terrible storm, actually a larger and bigger steel steamer named the Adriatic would actually come up next to her as the Myron was fighting. The Adriatic would come alongside the Myron and try to quote-unquote provide some shelter from the smashing of the waves and the wind and the snow as well. Meanwhile on land, a lookout from the Vermilion Life-Saving Station would give an alert. He did this when he saw the Myron out struggling in the seas, along with the Adriatic next to her trying to help. Captain McGaw and his Vermilion crew would then launch their motor-powered surf boat into the raging surf and attempt to follow the Myron. What an incredible show of bravery for these men to go out into this terrible storm to try to render aid to the struggling Myron. The Myron would come within around 1.5 miles of Whitefish Point. However, below deck, the water was still rising, and then finally it would also extinguish her boilers. After the extinguishing of the boilers, that was the final straw, and the Myron simply could not keep up with the raging seas and would begin to sink into Lake Superior. In about 4 minutes, the Myron was gone. However, her crew was also able to launch 2 of her lifeboats. They were, though, however, trapped in those lifeboats, surrounded by the raging seas around them, along with wreckage and lumber and all sorts of chaos. The Myron's captain was actually able to cling to the pilot house, which had broken off in her sinking. And as the Myron sank, Captain Neal was still inside, and that's when he made his way to the top of the pilot house and would cling for his dear life. After the sinking of the Myron, the Adriatic actually would heroically try to save the crew members that were on the lifeboats. It would in fact try twice to do this. However, both times would fail, as the Adriatic was actually forced to move away to avoid foundering and touching bottom, and thus causing herself to sink. Again, another vessel would make its attempts at saving the crew of the Myron, the 520-foot-long HP McIntosh, whose captain, Captain Lawrence, would try to save the crew of the Myron. They would see the Adriatic's attempts at saving them, but failed. This 520-foot-long steel steamer, HP McIntosh, would go through the wreckage field and come just close enough to throw out lines to the Myron's crew. However, again, because of the terrible storm and the drop in temperature and snow and all the elements, the crew were so tired and their hands were so numb that they could not grasp the lines and be rescued. After this attempt, Captain Lawrence had to make the decision to pull away from them and out into open water to avoid as well foundering because of the monstrous waves and terrible storm. Lastly here, the Vermilion life-saving crew would make their attempts to save the Myron's crew members on the lifeboats. Their tiny little boat would make its attempts. However, they would also risk smashing their boat in the mass wreckage field of floating lumber from the Myron when she sank. Captain McGaw from the Adriatic would make an estimation that the survivors' lifeboats could have possibly also swept down into Whitefish Bay. So from there he would make his way to Whitefish Point, some 20 miles away from the wreck site, and look for them. However, he would find nothing. Just after about 20 hours after the Myron sinking into Lake Superior, Captain Jordan of the steamer W.C. France, which was recently upbound out of the Sioux Locks, was also on the lookout for any of the survivors from the crew of the Myron. He would actually sight a body moving on some wreckage. Captain Jordan would then launch a lifeboat and make his way over to Captain Neal, still clinging to the roof of the Myron's pilot house. However, and thankfully, he had survived this terrible, terrible ordeal. There was still some hope after discovering Captain Neal half alive after the sinking of the Myron. However, tragically, all 17 crew members aboard the Myron would either freeze to death or drowned in Lake Superior. All of the bodies would be recovered though, and they were wearing their life jackets, which was, again, covered in ice. A tugboat which was owned by Frank Weston would actually find a lifeboat loaded with frozen crew members in Whitefish Bay several days after the Myron's sinking. A Dave Parrish and Jay Johnston would hack away and chop the sailors from the ice, and then a Simon Johnston would go on to bury them at Evans Mill. A large piece of the stern section was also washed ashore on the Canadian side of Whitefish Bay. Lumber from both the Myron and the Miztec as well would continue to wash ashore, and this is said to have happened for days west of Whitefish Point and in the Whitefish Bay area as well. The wreck of the Myron would be discovered in 1972 in about 50 feet of water and 1.5 miles from Whitefish Point. The Myron's wreck now is quite destroyed. However, she is a popular site for scuba divers as well. Again, the once Mark Hopkins, now the Myron, would tragically lose 17 crew members from her in this terrible storm that took her out on Lake Superior. May her crew members be respectfully remembered always. And that is the story of the tragic loss of the SS Myron. Well, everyone, that was quite a harrowing account. That must have been some storm out there, as many a ship story that we've learned and encountered on this channel. They get caught in the November gales, and it just goes. The history with this goes way back. I mean, this ship was built in 1888. Now that's Wild West cowboy times if you really think about it. And but she survived all the way up until 1919. I want to say this vessel was such a little workhorse. Like I didn't see much aside from her being sunk in Hay Lake. I don't actually completely know what sank her. Why did she sink? Was it a collision? Was it something else? I'm hoping maybe I can find some more information into that. I have a possible interesting follow-up video coming here soon with the Myron, so keep your eyes open for that possibly. We might actually be able to find out some more information about her and what happened more. But yeah, this ship and her story and the loss of her crew members, it really weighed heavy on my heart. And this is a story of a lesser known shipwreck that has happened out on Lake Superior that definitely needs to be talked about, definitely needs to be studied and appreciated and respectfully learned about. And just knowing what I cannot imagine multiple things like Captain Neal being out on that pilot house holding on for dear life and not knowing is he going to be rescued, let alone what's happened to his crew members. And and I've been in Lake Superior, and this is during summertime. Let me tell you, to let alone be out in Lake Superior in November with the temperature dropping drastically, freezing, absolutely freezing. Even in summertime, it is a cold, hard, brisk swim in Lake Superior in summertime. But to let alone be out there in a snow gale blizzard and hanging on like that, and I wonder if he lost his fingers because they were so. I gotta imagine that must have happened because they were so numb and probably frostbitten too. Just, ay, ay, ay. What a harrowing thing. But this needs to be handled respectfully and delicately and appropriately. And that's where I'm hoping to bring this story and her account and her loss on it. So if you guys enjoyed this, definitely let me know what you think in the comments section down below. I always welcome more additional insight and information and spelling corrections, anything like that. But yeah, these videos are always a good introductory to these ships and their stories, and should always be an encouragement for you yourself too to do some more research and digging and learning on it. So, but with all of that being said, I thank you guys again, as always, for being with me here today on this video. If you feel I've earned a like or a happy comment or anything like that, I would much appreciate it. And even if you think I didn't appreciate, hey, I thank you for being here with me today on this episode anyway, either way. This channel is fast growing, more than I could imagine it has right now. And I thank you guys for being here and enjoying this content with the interviews that we've got. Again, we've got some more in-person visits coming up later this summertime. I can't say yet everything that we've all got lined up, but as long as everything plays the way I hope it will, we got some good stuff in store for you guys. So just keep enjoying, keep watching, being patient, and yeah, thank you everybody again for your support. And yeah, God bless you all, and look forward again to the next episode on Songs of the Great Lakes. Thank you.